So in this tutorial I wanted to very briefly run through the two patches that you have, I hope, downloaded for this week. This is week 1.1.max patch and week 1.2.max patch. And I would encourage you to follow along or open them up and play with these objects, move them around, edit them, change characteristics of them. They are completely editable max patches. And most of the things that are in this patch have already been covered, but I did want to point out a couple of things. First being, here we have an object, and the object is a metro object, which we come across once already. This I put in. This is what happens when you enter an object that does not exist in max MSP. It turns brown, kind of ugly brown color. And that should suggest to you that you've made a mistake. If you're not sure if you've made a mistake, if you look in the console, you'll see a message saying, no object is no such object. And it will actually highlight the object when I go here and show you that this is where the object is. I put it in there knowing that it would generate an error message just so you could see what that looks like. Now I'll tell you a common mistake people make with max MSP. And that is that typing N to get a new object. And actually I'm going to change my format here to this one. So it's blue. I like the blue better. If I type plus 20, that's a legitimate argument. That's a legitimate object. It says basically that the operator or the object is plus and the argument is 20. Now if I type this, n plus 20 with no space, that is not a legitimate argument. And when I do that, it will turn brown. So if you see this, it's simply because you have said you're looking for the object plus 20. And there is no object plus 20. There's only an object plus. Okay, I hope that's clear. I just mentioned that because that's a common mistake that people make when they're first using max. You must separate your objects and your arguments by space. Message boxes we've come across. Anything can go in a message box. I'll give you a little piece of information about message boxes that you might not know, and that is that if you want to set the value of a message box, you can attach something into the right inlet of it. So if I'm using this dial, you can see that I'm actually setting the message box by putting something in the right inlet. That's what the right inlet of a message box is used for. Just a little, sometimes it's a useful way of displaying data in max MSP. Okay, comments. Please put comments on your patches. Use them in different sizes and different fonts and different colors to make your patch beautiful. The bang button we've already talked about. Here it's attached to a print object, so we can see that it prints the word bang. Toggles we've talked about. T for short, on, 1, off, 0. And then number boxes and float boxes. Here's a slider hooked up to both a number box and a float box, and you can see that as we put values in, the values of the number box, the int box and the float box change. And this is a dial. We can change the values of a dial by moving up and down, putting our mouse in it and moving up and down. Okay. This is very important, and we're going to get into this in a lot more detail next week. But one of the principles of max MSP is that in almost all cases, the first inlet of an object causes the object to perform its action or its operation, and that the other inlets in an object alter the characteristics or the properties of that particular object, depending on what it is. And they do not cause output. They do not cause the object to do anything. So, for example, here we've got a message 123.6 and another message 20. this message is going in the right inlet, this message is going in the left inlet. And so when we click on this, this will cause an action to occur, and we will get output. 133.6 and 133, because the int object here, the int number box, will truncate that result. That all makes sense. Now what happens when we click on this 20? Well, what happens is that this inlet resets this or alters the default value to a new value. So by clicking 20 here, even though this appears like it says plus 10, in fact it now is plus 20. So when I click on this, we'll get a different value. So and this is an important principle in MaxMSP. The left inlet causes actions, and the right inlet alters the state of the object, but does not generally cause output. We'll also see that when we start dealing with more complex objects, that inputs and outputs generally work from right to left. So when we are passing data into an object, the data gets passed in from the right to the left. When the leftmost piece of data enters the object performs whatever it's going to do, and if it has more than one outlet, it will output values from the right to the left. So there's always this sort of backwards reading, right to left action with max patches. More about that later. And just down below, there's a whole bunch of other examples of user interface objects. Pick sliders are two-dimensional sliders. K sliders, which basically send out notes like a keyboard. Note sliders, which allow you to represent and send out notes that look like traditional pitches. Menus, which you can customize to put in whatever you want. Presets, which allow us to connect interface objects to preset settings. Here's a range slider, which puts out, I should alter this so we can see what values come out of a range slider. I'm going to put, type I for an int box, and excuse me for being sloppy. Hold the Alt key to select those two, Command Y to make a nice patch cord, and you can see that a range slider puts out two values, the minimum and maximum values. What else have we got in here? We've got an envelope, which we can create complex envelopes. We won't be doing this right now, but we'll be using these when we start dealing with digital audio. And even objects that deal with sound. So if I turn this on, you can actually see my voice as I speak into the microphone, both a scope, which shows you the amplitude of my voice, and a meter, which is showing you basically the peak amplitude as I'm speaking. And there's all kinds of other objects. So there's thousands of objects in MaxMSP for you to become familiar with. The most important ones, though, are the object, the message box, and the number and float boxes, which are used to display values and provide inputs and outputs. Okay, so that's week 1.1. Very briefly, the week 1.2, I just like to make sure before we go very far in MaxMSP, we're able to generate some MIDI note values. And so I've got some of the basic MIDI objects here. And you won't be using this in your first assignment, but you definitely will be in your second assignment. MIDI info, I can bang this MIDI info object, and it actually will generate a menu which has all of the connected MIDI devices that are connected to my computer. So if I have multiple synthesizers or multiple interfaces, they'll all appear there. And this can be connected out to objects which are referencing those MIDI devices, like Note Out sends notes out, program out sends program changes out, and so on. And then we have the note in object, and the note in object receives notes from a MIDI keyboard. So I have a MIDI keyboard here which is not turned on, so let me turn it on. And now that it's turned on and I play a note, you're going to see the pitches and the velocities coming in. Note ons and note offs are all being tracked by that coming in through that note in object. And they were being passed over here. And then we have the make note object. And the make note object we briefly saw before. And that's an object which actually creates note on messages, and then after a certain amount of time creates note off messages. So the duration of 5,000 milliseconds is the length of the note. So if I play a note here, such as, well, put it on my keyboard, but I'll play it here, 70, and hit return, we're going to get a 5-second note with a pitch of 70. Program out is program changes. So if I want a different instrument or different sound, such as this one, 34, whatever that is, I can't remember, and I type 62 or a bunch of notes, we'll get a different timbre. So just to recap these, note in receives notes from a MIDI keyboard if you happen to have a MIDI keyboard connected. If not, use a K slider. Okay. And you can simulate note as if you had a MIDI keyboard. And the make note object creates note ons, a delay of time, and then creates the note offs. This is connected to a note out object, which specifies has a default channel, and so the pitch comes out of the make note and the velocity comes out of the make note, and they go into the note out. So we get a note on and then we get a note off. Program out changes programs, and MIDI info retrieves information from our environment. So if you want to see if this works, try playing with different timbres by changing your program out. 12 is a kind of a vibraphone, I think, and so if you can make clusters of notes, because all those notes are 5,000 milliseconds long. If I wanted to change the duration of my notes to something much shorter, let's say like 500, I can input that value into my make note, replace the 5,000 with a 500, and now I've got much shorter notes. So play around with that, and if you want to add more MIDI objects to it, you can. But these are some of the basic MIDI objects that we will be using a lot throughout the first half of the course. And I just like to get them in there early on so that you can make some sounds, scare the neighbors, and drive your roommates crazy. And that's all for week 1.